My name is Rishi Donat. I am the Chief Human Resources Officer here at the Foundation Fighting Blindness. I have the privilege of working with 60 other staff members and see their passion and their drive every day for the mission in finding cures and treatments and cures and therapeutics for inherited retinal diseases. I see the passion for the relationships that they build each day, and I'm very honored to be here today. And welcome. Welcome to the session, Coping with Anxiety, Depression, and Stress Related to Vision Loss or Serving in a Helper Role. This session will last approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes, and the last 20 minutes of the session will be reserved for your questions. Please note that this session is being audio recorded. If you are using an assisted listening device, the channel was listed outside and I didn't look at it. I apologize. It's channel 5. I got it. Please turn to channel 5 if you are using an assisted listening device. And please don't forget to silence your phones. Joining us for this panel discussion is Dr. Ann Wagner and Eric Ringham. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage you to be social with us. You can follow the Visions conversation on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and share your experiences using the conference hashtag Visions2022. This session will be live streamed on our national Facebook page. Dr. Ann Wagner is a board-certified clinical psychologist who has worked at the Minneapolis VA for the past 25 years, serving veterans and their families. She works primarily on the PTSD clinical team, providing evidence-based assessments and interventions for post-traumatic stress disorder and other trauma-related problems. Dr. Wagner herself is legally blind due to retinitis pigmentosa. Eric Ringham is a freelance writer and editor with side careers in stage acting and voiceover work, which I meant to ask you about, so maybe you can talk to it. He is a former senior editor at Minnesota Public Radio News and commentary editor at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Both he and Anna Wagner live in my hometown of Minneapolis, and I'm very happy to introduce them to you. You guys can take over. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so first off, I want to thank Rishi and all of the moderators and the mic runners these last 2 days. They've been amazing. And Michelle DiVincenzo, hope I'm pronouncing your last name right, thank you all so much for making this so smooth for me and Eric. It's been wonderful. So can we applaud them? Thank you. Thank you. So, I work for the federal government, and I'm required to make some disclaimers. So, the information I provide in this presentation today, it does not represent any official views of the federal government or the Department of Veterans Affairs. The views expressed are entirely my own. I'm also required to let you know I'm not entering into a clinical provider role with any of you. I am here today providing education in my role as a citizen psychologist, and I'm just so happy to be here. I've been hearing stories and meeting you, and I had no idea how much I would feel like I'm with family. Sorry, I didn't know the emotions were going to show up. It'll make more sense later when I share a little bit more about myself, about why that is, but you are wonderful. So we're going to introduce ourselves, then I'm going to review some principles that I think are important for understanding the emotional world. That's what I think my role here is today with you, of the emotional world and ways to work with our emotions in ways that feel healthy and healing for yourself and for others. We're going to talk about some unique dilemmas facing people with vision loss and those serving in the sighted helper role, and some coping strategies. And I'm going to share a mindfulness exercise with you that I use a lot in my clinical work. and I'm not quite sure of the timing of that. I'm going to kind of wing it. A lot of this is winging. These are ideas I hope to share with you, but how some of the interactive parts go will also dictate how this flows. And I have no idea what Eric's going to be saying, which also makes it kind of fun. It keeps me on my toes. So we'll just see how all that goes. So to introduce myself first, I am 6'1" in shoes. I'm white female. I have long dark black hair. And I have retinitis pigmentosa that I know is autosomal dominant. I am eagerly going to do my genetic testing soon. I have not yet done that. But what I know about the family transmission is my grandpa had RP and had 2 sons and 3 daughters. Both sons inherited it, and one of the daughters, which is my mom, Grace. My mom married a farmer, my dad, and they had 5 kids, and both sons inherited it, and 2 of their daughters. So 4 out of 5 in my family inherited RP. So in a family of 7, 2 had normal vision, my dad and my sister Becky, the middle child, and the rest of us had RP. That was the heaviest loaded family in all of with my cousins and my uncles. So obviously I was raised in a blind culture, and I feel incredibly blessed to have had that support. I've talked to people in the last few days where they were the first and only, and it's just helped me know just how fortunate I was, because the sighted people on my mom's side of the family knew we needed light. They knew we didn't have a lot of side vision, and they were right there for us. And I never felt judged in my extended relatives or my immediate family. We had security and we had safety. Outside of that, something else to know. So I grew up on a working farm, and I am so curious. Any farmers out there? If so, say yes. A few. Okay, good. Yeah. So this was a working farm. Any income came from what we produced. So as a child, I learned my work helped support the family, and that's incredibly meaningful to me, the sense of responsibility. I wouldn't have had it any other way, but we worked morning till night every day. We had 20 milking cows, chickens that we used for meat. I raised turkeys for 4-H. Those were my special project. And we had 3 greenhouses. One was kind of the staging greenhouse near the highway, our driveway, where customers could come to buy plants, and then 2 farther back that were our planting greenhouses, and massive gardens that my dad always planted more than we could keep up with the weeding. So by the end of the summer, they just looked terrible. We just couldn't keep up. And we had hay fields to hay in the summer as well, so it was just a lot of work. And we sold our vegetables at the Duluth Farmers Market every Wednesday and Saturday all summer long. We had the Wagner booth, and we were part of that Duluth community, even though we grew up 30 miles west in a small town of 400. So we had a grade school, grades kindergarten through 6th, and then the high school was a couple towns over, 7 through 12. My class was 21 students, so you get a feel for the small town. So in our immediate family and other farm kids, we felt a safety and security. The rest of the kids, however, were not kind to farmers. There's some teasing about knowing the Wagner kids. Most of us had visual problems, especially at night. So there's some teasing and cruelty, but we were poor. It's an important part. We were, as I heard frequently, below the poverty level. Like, that sounded really scary, hearing that. So I had hand-me-down clothes. We shopped at thrift stores, and I didn't care. As long as I was warm, it didn't matter until it got to the age where kids were really cruel about the poverty. My dad cut our hair. I was tall. I had braces, short hair cut in a bowl cut. So you get the picture, and I was a straight-A student, by the way, so I kind of met the stereotype of a nerd, and that was the kindest word I was called. Sometimes there's physical bullying, which is amazing to me. Why? Usually it was words. So that was a regular thing in my community. But my family and my home life, I felt free, and it was wonderful. So my mom had an Irish heritage, and she was feisty, self-confident, and bossy at times, but incredibly loving. And I'm going to be sharing some stories about her today because I'm honoring her with a lot of who I am. She was my hero and my role model because she never let the blindness interfere in any way. And that's incredible. So I'm going to let Eric introduce himself now.
Hello. Thank you. Well, obviously I hit the jackpot. I came from a family that already had some experience with blindness. My dad, who was a Lutheran pastor, developed macular degeneration and became pretty, I didn't know much about it, but as far as I know now, he had what seems to have been a pretty profound case and was really impaired in his ability to live his life and move around. But I did learn a few things from him about blind etiquette. I learned how to work with somebody who's using a cane. I learned how to guide somebody down the sidewalk. I learned to offer to cut food. So when I met Anne, because we lived next door to each other briefly, it's a long story, don't ask. But when I met Anne, I knew I had some stuff that I could pull out, that I could try to make her feel comfortable, and frankly, to show off a little bit that I had some skills that she might appreciate. Rather clumsily, I might add. She mentioned her dad, and he was a farmer, and he was a man of very, very few words. And when Anne and I were not yet married, but had been dating for a while, we were going out to dinner with Anne's parents. And I'm sorry, how many people here consider themselves sighted helpers? All right, all of you know what I'm about to get at. Your partner needs to go to the restroom, you guide her to the restroom, and you wait there. Well, George, Anne's dad, also guided Anne's mom, Grace, to the restroom. And one thing led to another, and eventually I found myself kind of nervous because, this is the father of the girl I hope to marry. And I find myself standing next to him outside the restroom. It's a little awkward. So I said, so I guess we both spend a lot of time standing around outside ladies' restrooms, huh? And he said, probably think we're a couple of perverts. So that's my introduction to Anne's family. Anne?
That reminds me that my dad, my mom was always there for emotional support, and that's a key point of what I'm going to be talking about later. The security I felt with my mom. I would come home after school and tell her about the highlights and the struggles, and she would just listen. If I was crying, she would just hold me, and she would just say, And after the wave had passed, she'd say, you feel better? I'd say, yeah. And she said, okay, let's get back to work. And I did. And it was just, there's never any judgment, no advice giving, and I internalized how healthy and healing that was to just know there's somebody for secure emotional support. And that's one of the most significant principles I hope you can take away. As human beings, we need to feel secure that we can share our emotional joys and our emotional pain with someone and feel that they're with us, that they care about our emotions and we're not alone. It is the most healthiest thing as human beings we need. And we have all this programming, though, millions and millions of neuronal pathways, which I call the malware in the brain of judgments. And judgments hurt. The you should or you should not the right, wrong, better than, worse than, the not good enoughs. They hurt because they divide us from other people. They come between us when somebody puts a judgment at our feet. I just want to check in. How many of you at some point have felt a judgment being put out there at your feet by another human being and felt hurt show up? Say yes. Yeah. And they also hurt because we internalize them. We've been so bombarded with messages of somehow not being good enough that we start to internalize and believe them ourselves. And now we've got all that in our head dividing us from our own core self, and we're disconnected from listening to what feels healthy and healing inside. How many of you think you've got some internalized judgments that came from outside of us? They were never ours to begin with, but over time and repeated messages of how we're supposed to be, the shoulds, we've started to put that at our own feet. Say yes if you think you might have that experience. Yeah. And does it hurt? Yeah. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here. And we're all friends here. That's what helped me with my anxiety today, is reminding myself I'm going to be with friends. My dad had a rough childhood. His dad had some problems with alcohol, and there's some violence that he grew up with. And he internalized his emotions. He was quiet and suppressing, and he focused on being a workaholic. There's very little, it was so rare to ever have Dad's undivided attention, because if we needed to talk to him, we'd have to talk to him while he was milking the cows, or shoveling the manure, or fixing the tractor, or all the different things. He had great divided attention. He'd answer our questions. Or there were other kids around. It was just rare to ever have his undivided attention, but that was okay. He was there if we really needed him, and that was more than enough. But he had a tendency to believe we should know how to do things without actually telling us or showing us. So his should thoughts were always being put at our feet. And then he'd get mad and give us the silent treatment, because he had never been taught emotional communication, how to express, I'm feeling disappointment, or even trying to get in our shoes to understand we couldn't know what we didn't know. So my mom, her feisty Irish self, who also understood what my dad was carrying, would yell, "George, these kids can't read your mind. You need to tell them," almost every day. "George," I still remember that. And he would say, "But they should know." And our shoulders would go up when we'd hear Mom being our voice of reason. "Yes, Mom, you tell them the truth." She spoke truth. And then Dad would double down with the judgmental thought and say, "But they should." And then he'd leave. And our shoulders would slump again. "Oh, Dad." So then we'd turn to Mom, and she'd sigh, and she'd say, "I'll go find out what you need to do." And she'd get out of him, come back, and show us what we needed to do. And my mom's blind. And she worked side by side my dad on that farm and raised 5 kids. No wonder she's my hero, right? So belongingness and security were so critical. I had a support system of people who understood about the role of the blindness. And because my dad never treated my mom as disabled, not once did I ever witness him treating her like she couldn't do something. Instead, he'd tell her, "Figure it out." And she would. My mom's superpower was as finding solutions. How many of you with visual impairment, or if you have visual impairment, say yes if you think you've kind of become skilled at finding solutions? Yeah, and being like a super planner? Yes, awesome, yay. And so that's some of my history, and I do have, despite my mom's feisty self-confidence, she totally believed in herself, she believed in what she stood for, and she never made judgmental statements. She's truly unique. I internalized some negative judgments from Dad's messages of somehow not being good enough, and from the school kids. Somehow they had a lot of power with their messages of me not being good enough because I was poor was the main reason. So I had to work through that in my life. How many of you, or if you think you've ever struggled with some internalized ideas that maybe you're not good enough because of other people's messages and judgments? Yes, yeah. So that pain, when it's triggered, I want to open up to validating the truth. The hurt is telling us something important. It's a valid, healthy emotion, and it's telling you that that core sense of self that knows what's healthy and healing and knows your lived experiences, your truths. It's trying to tell you that your self-esteem is completely intact. It always has been. Because if we truly at our core believed we weren't good enough, we wouldn't feel the hurt. Hurt is so important to validate. It's truth. So those are some of the principles. Emotions show up to tell us what we care about. They speak to our core, our heart. And it's important to feel secure in a relationship to open up, because if we've been given messages, so we've been taught judgments. So here's a principle from a model called ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. It has many principles. It's developed by Stephen Hayes. You can Google. There are tons of TED Talks and podcasts about ACT. Russ Harris has some amazing ones. He's an ACT provider as well. One of the core principles is how these judgments that have become malware in our minds, there's no truth in a single judgment. And yet they have such power because we're surrounded by them. Since childhood, we've been taught these messages. If you've experienced a message when you're really itty-bitty, and we're not judging parents because their minds have been hacked just like ours for generations. Language is the culprit to human suffering, and it comes from the shoulds and the should-nots. But if you have been given a message of stop crying, there's nothing to cry about, say yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Right there is a message. This is why this programming is so insidious, is we're told that if we don't suppress our natural emotion that we're crying because something is upsetting us, that's a core affect. It's a fancy word for emotions. It's core, it's real, we're crying, we're upset. And the big people in our life, because of their programming, they're feeling discomfort, they don't know what to do, maybe they're feeling helplessness, they don't know what to do with it, so they're saying, oh, stop crying, there's nothing to cry about. We're told right there, we're supposed to be able to control our emotions. So we learn the earliest form of avoidance, suppression. We just bury it and we put on a brave face, and then we're praised. Oh, what a big girl, what a big boy. Now we're accepted. So our core drive above anything else is for belongingness. So to strive for any kind of connectedness at all, if we're not being offered healthy belongingness that I was privileged to have with my mom, if we're not offered that naturally, because I think my mom is rare, because everybody else has also been programmed, we're not supposed to show our emotional pain or some other something wrong. Right there, judgment. Okay. So we, of course, suppress and we try to be what other people want so that we won't be rejected or abandoned. We need connectedness. So we learn all types of ways of avoiding, and we're going to get into that a little later. But I want to share with you a mindfulness exercise that I use that embeds some of the core principles. And so I'll just invite you to, it'll take just a couple of minutes. Are you game for this? Okay. All right, so I'm going to invite you to just notice being in this present moment, in this space, in this time. And I invite you to connect to that core sense of self that knows what feels healthy and healing. It knows what matters to you, and it just is. And as you connect to that core self, just experience these words as I say them. May I be well. May you be well. May all beings be well. May I be fully present with you. May you be fully present with me. May all beings be fully present with each other. May I be open and authentic with myself and with you. May you be open and authentic with yourself and with me. May all beings be open and authentic with themselves and with each other. May I know that I matter. May you know that you matter. May all beings know that they matter. May you know that you matter. May you know that you matter. And now taking in a slow, deep breath, breathing in vitality and connectedness. You are not alone. And letting out your breath slowly, opening to calmness and centeredness. So this exercise illustrates the importance of trusting that your core always knows what's healthy and healing, and you always matter. Despite the messages we're bombarded with by other people's hacked minds, they're not to blame. This has been passed on. Language is the culprit to human suffering. So I'm going to do an exercise, an interactive exercise with you to illustrate ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, some of the core experiential learning. It's education. I'm not providing treatment. But I also want to let you know my work is influenced by narrative therapy. It's a model of therapy that was developed by Michael White and David Epstein in the late 1980s. And it, at its core, honors personal agency and trusting that you are the expert in your own life. You know what matters to you, and your truths are the most important thing in that model of therapy. And it looks at the narratives, the weaving the themes of narratives and how we sometimes fuse with what we call the problem narratives, and they have such a power and a heaviness in our lives. And we try to, in that therapy, connect to maybe the most preferred narratives that aren't as strong yet and how to thicken them. And one of the core principles, which is also philosophy, is the importance of externalizing. So we externalize and we name. The idea, if you can name it, you can tame it. And by taking the observer role, which is also a principle in ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, if we can observe our thoughts as thoughts, because that's what they are, they're just language. Our core is predominantly connecting to what feels healthy or healing, and our emotional world is more us than language is. Language is just language. It's a mind thing, and our heart and soul and our core is more of an emotional body thing. But if you think you've been programmed to hang out in your head a lot, intellectualizing or rationalizing, say yes. Yes. Yeah. So it's become a safe place for connecting. We connect to other people, mind to mind. Okay, at least I'm connecting because we need something for survival. So these are survival strategies, and they need to be validated. I will never judge the survival strategies that we need to survive. There's another model of therapy, the brief psychodynamic therapies. In some of my early training was in object relations, attachment theory, and psychodynamic work. And AEDP, Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy by Diana Fosha, has a core principle of, and it's just borne out with the veterans I work with. So we know that following adverse events in our lives or trauma or stressors, we're going to feel emotional pain. That's natural. The pain is showing up to tell us what we care about. But what's even more painful, and I'll ask a veteran or sometimes they'll share, other veterans have said that the pain of that traumatic memory that your younger self experienced, they'll say that that pain is certainly significant, but what's even more painful is feeling alone with it. That profound loneliness hurts even more. And I'll ask, does that resonate? And I'll have veterans start to cry as they connect to that truth. Yes. Never feeling secure in a relationship to share at that deep level because of all of the incredible programming that's saying we're not supposed to feel what we feel or it's something wrong. So we suppress and all the other things we do to avoid. So the profound loneliness, the brief psychodynamic approaches recognize that for secure attachment, it's important to feel that we can feel secure enough that most of the time this person cares about what we feel, they care about us, and we can express it, and we can set the frame, by the way, a takeaway. If you decide you're going to start opening up to somebody who seems basically kind, and you want to start to cut through the ways you've been avoiding and protecting yourself and surviving, but trying to open up to that deeper connectedness, you can set the frame and say, I want to share some emotional pain, and I don't really need advice. I don't need anyone to fix it. I just need some expression that you care and that I matter. People are going to feel such relief to know that's all I have to do and that's meaningful. And you're like, yeah, that's all you have to do. Metaphorically, like my mom, just hold me until the wave is past. And then that healing, that's the magic in healing. It occurs in relationships. Healing occurs in relationships. We are social creatures. So I heard how powerful some of the meetings last night are and how these conferences are so meaningful because we're coming together, and why I think I got tearful at the beginning, because my mom and dad are passed. I live far away from my siblings. My cousins have become distant, busy lives, and I hadn't realized how much I was missing a feeling of community and family and connectedness around the blindness. And so I'm so grateful for all of you, and I'm so glad we're here. And I'm curious if that also resonates for you. If so, say yes. Yes. Yeah, good. So, externalizing. You're going to see me do that a lot. I'm kind of moving my hand off to the side. It's an important principle. So, I've externalized the blindness. So, a takeaway, potentially helpful idea is to know that I am Anne. I am not blindness. The blindness does its thing and it has its effects in my life. Of course it does. And there are moments it may create a situation where I feel emotions that are telling me about what I care about. The blindness doesn't make me feel anything. I feel what I feel because of what I care about. Grief and loss are kind of really common emotions related to progressive losses of any kind of physical ability, or even if it's an abrupt loss. I mean, loss is going to elicit grief. If you think you've had moments of feeling grief show up, see, I'm externalizing the grief also. It shows up. It's something we can then look at and we can validate. But if you've experienced grief in your life at any point, say yes. Yeah. So we're going to externalize so that we can look at it, and then we can invite compassion for our own core emotions instead of the old patterns we've been taught, which is to avoid and suppress or keep a guard up, but to connect to and have, at least for ourselves, self-compassion until we can open up in relationships to feel we have somebody safe that we can open up to. Community, and I call this village moments. Village moments. Because if we didn't have language, we would grow up in villages, and if somebody experienced something painful, they would cry. That's a natural expression of emotional pain. And unfortunately, our society's done a lot of judgments towards men in particular, that somehow that's weak, or it's not tough, or it's not manly. Baloney, sorry, you were born with the same tear ducts as women. Crying is healthy, it's part of being human. So we would cry, and other people, if we didn't have language and judgments, other people would notice and come and just sit and be. Because they would know that for themselves, that's what feels healthy, to not be alone with it. And when the wave passes, they might pat you on the arm and we get up and we go to work. Or do the next thing that we valued. And in moments of joy and laughter, have you ever seen how when somebody is laughing in pure joy, heads turn? Or you feel drawn to it? Have you noticed that? Say yes if you have. Yeah. Same thing. We bond. It's part of that social drive to come together in moments of joy and delight and the moments of pain and all the things in between. But so these judgments are the culprits to human suffering. That's where we struggle. We struggle with our own natural emotions because we've been taught to. So I'm just going to check in with Erica on the time. How are we doing?
It is 1:37. Did you want to do those interactive exercises?
Yeah, I think I'll save the story about Mom till later. Sure. Okay. So quickly, and this is where I'm going to have the mic runners come to you all. So I'm going to just start to name the emotions, maybe the more painful. I'm going to ask you to name the emotions you struggle with the most, that you try to avoid or suppress or avoid if you can. And I'm just going to be looking for emotion names. So if each of you want to pick one, and if it's one that somebody's already said, you can either think of a different one that hasn't been said yet or lower your arm. But we'll just get maybe 10 or so emotion names. And as you say them, each of them, I want you to picture that emotion is now going up to the ceiling and hanging out there. So we're externalizing the emotions, and it's just hanging up there in the ceiling, in the air above you. And so we're going to have just a whole ceiling full of emotions here in a bit. So.
Right. Go ahead, Michelle.
Vulnerable.
Vulnerable. Excellent. So we have vulnerable emotions going up there, which might be also tied with uneasy or a bit of feeling insecurity.
Anger.
Anger. Excellent one. So anger's up there. Fear. Good.
Happiness.
What was that?
Happiness.
Happiness. So we usually don't struggle with happiness. So,
Okay. I'll take it back then.
But I love that you named an emotion that we would love to claim. So that gets its own special place. It gets to dance around the room, if that's okay. Happiness gets to dance around the room. But can you think of a painful emotion you try to avoid?
Worry.
Worry. Worry is actually a cognitive thing. See, this is great. So worry is what the mental mind does. But it does it because it's feeling some emotion, or it often shows up with an emotion of stress or anxiety. For the person who said worry, does that resonate? Stress and anxiety? Showing up with worry? Yes. Is she saying, okay, good.
Lonely.
Loneliness. Yes, that's up there. Yes. What else?
Shame.
Shame. Yes. Other emotions.
Rejection.
So rejection is kind of the act what another person might do, and we often say it's a feeling. And I guess feeling abandoned and rejection, we're going to put them up there, but there's often the core emotion there is hurt. Does that resonate with the person who said rejection? As a deeper emotion, hurt. Yeah, but I'm trying to help differentiate also thought processes, which are languaging, the actual experience of what another person does, and then the core emotion that shows up. Does that make sense? Okay. So, but we'll put them up there. Rejection, abandonment, hurt. What else?
Apathy.
Apathy. Excellent one. Oh, you guys are great. What
Humiliation.
else? Humiliation, yeah.
Grief.
Grief and loss. That's a really big one, so if it's okay, I'm going to have that one really be a big part of the what's up in the air. Okay, what else? I didn't hear that. What was that last one?
Fear.
Fear, yes. So you have done great. I'm sorry if we didn't get to everybody, but you've named so many of the painful emotions. Helplessness is a really important one too that I'm just going to name, and I'm just going to do a little bit of education about a couple of these emotions. So helplessness is the emotion that shows up when we can't control something we wish we could in this one moment. And guess what? We only have control over one thing in life. One thing. And that's what we choose to say or do in this one moment right now. That's it. Just what you yourself are saying and doing in this one moment. We are helpless to control anything else. We have zero control over what other people say, what they do, what they feel, what they believe. Zippo, no control. And relationships are the most important things for us. It's part of survival. So that kind of matters a lot. So helplessness shows up hundreds, if not thousands of times a day because of all the things we can't control. Just in regards to relationships, we also cannot control the past. There's no time machine invented yet. And we tend to hang out in our head, ruminating about the past. And we can't control it. And it gives us these illusions and fantasies of trying to control something we can't. So helplessness is the emotion. And it's the most frequent of all the painful emotions because it actually shows up with all the other ones. Because in the moment that some other painful emotion is showing up, we can't undo the reality of what is. There's the helplessness too. Because we don't want to feel those other emotions because we've been programmed. One of the most painful, harmful judgments is that we have been told that our own core emotions are bad and toxic and they're going to harm us if we don't get rid of them. Oh my gosh, so I'm feeling something painful. The fear of being rejected and not accepted is so threatening because we are social creatures that helplessness now shows up with all of the other emotions because we wish we could control them and yet we can't control what is. If the emotions are here, they're here in this moment, and then we do all the things we try to avoid them. So helplessness, part of this presentation is to help you understand that these core emotions are showing up to try to tell you the truths of what your own heart cares about, who you are, what you stand for, what matters to you. They're natural, they're healthy, they're innocent, these emotions. Helplessness tells us two truths. It tells us the first truth is that you can't control anything, and whatever it is in this moment, you cannot control. It's outside of your control. That's one truth. It's also telling you that you care about that thing you can't control. And if you can linger in that truth for your own self-compassion and self-acceptance, then you get to go even deeper. What is it about that I care about? Why is that? What does that say about who I am and what I want to stand for? Okay, how do I want to show up in this moment? I can't control that directly, but it's telling me this broader value is important to me. Maybe there's something else I can do. And that's the redemption. That's our empowerment, is despite having zero control over anything else, in this moment, you are in control of your actions. So we call that the choice point moment in ACT. Every moment's a fresh choice point. You get to choose what you do when you're mindful of your values and what it is you want to show up, and when you're aware of the trickiness of all this programming and judgments. It takes mindfulness and awareness that we can stand against the programming. I worked with a veteran who named all that chatter malware stuff Melvin, and I do apologize if anybody in here is named Melvin, but sometimes naming it is helpful. So Melvin's running amok today. Oh my gosh, Melvin tried to trick me into suppressing or expressing my anger by raising my voice. That's not how I want to be. Yeah. So naming things helps. It invites in a different relationship. But anger's the other emotion I want to give some education about. Anger often is actually functioning as an avoidance. It's not often the actual core emotion. It's core when we're actually being threatened, and it gives us that energy to fight, to protect ourselves. Most of the time, it functions like this. Other painful emotions are showing up. So the anger shows up to give us an illusion of control. It gives us adrenaline, and it's like I'm about to do something. So it, more often than not, it's suppressing helplessness, fear, or hurt. Because it's giving us a fantasy, the very biological programming to have it be a defense. Gives us an illusion of control. It's not true, So people who have that pattern where anger has been showing up to try to suppress the core emotions, the anger management strategies are important then to learn to recognize, okay, anger, you're showing up. I'm going to give you permission that you can pass. I don't need you to protect me from my own core emotions. They are lonely. They need me to validate their truths. The hurt's telling me that deep down I know I have intact self-esteem. I know what matters and how I want to be treated. The helplessness is telling me I can't control, though, what another human being puts out there. But how do I want to be? How do I want to show up? That kind of process. So anger often is an avoidance. Anxiety, believe it or not, is also, if it's chronic, it's probably functioning as a defense. So worry is an avoidance. If I stay in my head and I worry and I think about the what ifs and if onlys, it gives us a fantasy, an illusion of control. Do you think you've ever done that? Yes, say yes. Yeah. We're all programmed to do that. There's no blame here or shame at all. And by the way, shame is a manufactured emotion. We're not born with it. It comes only from judgments. And it comes from the messages from other people in our lives that somehow shame on you, like your entire person is somehow bad. But now it's part of the human experience because we have all these judgments rattling around in our minds and it gets elicited, but it's not natural. We're not born with it. It comes only from language. So that's just some education. But now I'd like to hear your voices again. What are some of the things you do? So we've got all those emotions up here in the ceiling floating around, all of our natural humanity. Now over on, it would be your, okay, if it's my right, your left. Eric's laughing because I'm actually right-left dyslexic, and he'll tell me it's something's off to my right, and and he'll say your other right, because I'll inevitably go to my left. So anyway, but my right, your left. Imagine this is where we're going to put the things you say for the ways you struggle to try to control your own painful emotions. What are some of the avoidance patterns, like staying in my head or isolating? Those kinds of things. The things you do to try to feel better or to not feel your emotions. And maybe if you don't feel like you want to disclose something you've done, it can be things you've seen other people do. So then it opens up the door that maybe it's not you. Okay, go for it. Yes, alcohol, drugs, cigarettes. Thank you.
Just outright denial.
Denial, perfect.
Transference.
Transference, yeah, ooh, sophisticated term. Yeah, we can project it on to other things. Yeah.
Sleep.
Sleep, stay in bed. Yeah.
Eat.
Eat, yes.
Avoidance.
Avoidance, that's the bigger, yes, that is the biggest term. All of these are avoidance patterns, well named, and we're going to put them all over off to the right, so all those things are hanging out. What else? What are some other practices of avoidance?
People pleasing and helping other people so I don't think about myself.
Oh, you are so brilliant. Yes. Focusing on others because you found that that's a way to feel connected. It's a survival drive, and it can also be a value, of course, but it can also be functioning as avoidance of your own pain. Brilliant. What else?
Telling myself to suck it up.
Oh, there's that internalized judgment because that's what we've been told to do. Oh, yes, it's an avoidance of, it's buying that fantasy that somehow that's working. Sure it is. I'll just suck it up and focus on something else. Excellent. What else?
Wrapped up at the edges of many of these is a feeling of frustration. Total, complete frustration. And what I do is I hide in listening to books.
Yes.
I run away to another land that somebody else has written.
Yes. I love my Audible books, and even as a kid, I would have my nose in a book because I valued that. And that's the tricky ones, when some are partly valued and they function as avoidance, like the double hooks, right? And so distractions, we may have a category of all the ways we distract, whether it's focusing on work, the workaholic is a form of avoidance, hobbies that if it's more than what we would actually value, chances are, if it's out of proportion to whatever your core feels is healthy, then it's probably functioning as avoidance. And any hobby has that potential of becoming that. So all the distractions, TVs, video games, phones. Oy, okay.
Brandon's got one.
Projection. Yeah, assuming other people are, if other people feel it, then it can be theirs. We won't have to feel it ourselves. And it's a very subtle, kind of sophisticated type of defense that can happen. But it's also part of the mind reading. If I can somehow guess what other people are thinking, and believe me, I tried with my dad, and I still didn't know how to do things because I hadn't been taught yet. Yeah. What else?
Pick a fight.
Pick a fight. Oh, you guys are so good at this. Yeah, aggression and violence is avoidance. It's that illusion of control, and when you actually act on the urge to do something aggressive, picking a fight it gets the adrenaline going, and it gives you this idea, at least I'm doing this, so you can suppress the helplessness about the things you can't control. Even raising your voice in an argument is a form of avoidance of the helplessness. We are suppressing it by buying an illusion, a fantasy of control. If I just raise my voice, then I'll make this person listen and understand what I'm saying. It doesn't work. And by the way, no judgments here. This is a room where we're going to stand against judgments. So if you know these patterns are things you've done, I raise my voice, poor Eric, a lot. And I do express regret right away and let him know he's the love of my life and the last person I would ever want to receive that negative energy, but all of our minds have been hacked. So repair is possible, thank goodness. What else?
Two favorite things: get lost in the rabbit hole of Pinterest or online shopping.
Yes, the shopaholic, the gambling. Oh, yes. So all of these they're all hanging out over there. These strategies, these patterns, we've all been taught. They've been programmed. You are not to blame at all. These have been helping you survive because we didn't know until we come to something like this and we seek education and we take it in, whatever resonates with you from today, to realize what's hanging out on the ceiling is our humanity. And those emotions have been lonely for a long, long time. And they matter, and you matter. So all these things, once we're aware, we can start to stand against the ones you really don't approve of and start to claim healthy sharing and connectedness. So there's one more invisible wall where we keep kind of a guard up because we're never quite sure if we try to express, are we going to be told, stop crying, there's nothing to cry about. The pain. And when we're so young, these messages are everywhere. They're in books, they're in shows, they're everywhere. You just start to notice the programming that people are being told all these shoulds and should nots. So we keep a little bit of a wall up in our sharing. We don't share ourselves with others fully, and maybe we don't let them share with us. And so I call that the invisible wall. How many of you say yes if you think you might have that? Yes. Yeah. Excellent. So those are all over there. So now on this side of the room, the other left, whatever you want to call it, we're going to think about just some of the negative effects. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to name some and ask you to resonate. Say yes if you think this might be a negative effect of each of these ways we avoid that you've all just named over here on the other side of the room. So these are the avoidance patterns. What are the negative effects of just those actions, the alcohol or drug use, the avoidance, the staying home, staying in bed, the isolating, the wall up, anger, all those ways we avoid? Negative effects. Do you think they might have a negative effect on your physical body? Yes. Good. On your relationships? On your brain functioning itself. Okay, and the way that works is if we're only looking at the same four walls or just being in the same place doing very little, our brain needs stimulation for optimal functioning. So guess what? That kind of doesn't, we're not optimizing our brain health by doing all this avoidance. So our brain health, our own cognitive functioning is impaired. Do you think your self-respect and self-esteem might be taking a hit when you do something you really don't approve of? Yes. So most of us, if we connect to our core, knows, boy, when you look at those avoidance behaviors over there, none of those, a few of the hobbies maybe in proportion, but the rest are really not me. They're not what I approve of for how I want to show up. So in the moments where we're doing an action we don't approve of, our self-esteem is a little bit lower, our self-respect. But the core of us already knows that we yearn for healthy, positive relationships. It's already in us, that healthy drive. Yay, it's been protected. I guarantee it. Despite all the programming, the core of you is protected. You know that you matter, and you're going to know when you feel safe opening up. Yay. So self-esteem and self-respect might be harmed. Relationships, physical well-being. Do you think work functioning might be affected? Yes. Yeah. There you go. Quality of life. Think that might go down? Yes. And this invisible wall has its own unique effect because it's core to us to feel understood by another human being. If we're not sharing ourselves because of that invisible wall, we don't get to feel understood. So that's a negative effect. And that's where that profound loneliness, as the greatest emotional pain we feel, comes in. So I'm going to challenge all of you to seek out people who seem kind, maybe educate them that you're going to take what feels risky to just be human and open. And I use the word authenticity. It's my natural state of how I most want to be. We get to relate to our emotions hanging out on the ceiling with compassion and understanding, and we can stand against the avoidance. And we can learn to observe the mind's chatter as programming in language. That's all it is. There isn't a single truth in our lived experience that comes from judgments. There's no truth in judgments. Our lived experience in the moment knows all of our truths. And I also want to add another really important principle. Please, whatever you can, try not to fuse with or buy any negative judgments that have been programmed about your younger selves. Whatever they experienced in their moments when they're making choices is their lived experience. Your younger selves have all the wisdom of that moment, and it's amazing how even 10 minutes later, our next 10 minutes older self already has ideas and shoulds for their younger self. They forget the moments that the lived experience of that younger self. The choices you made were just what you needed to, and then maybe later new information occurred to your mind that would have you make a different choice in that similar situation again. That's what we call growth and learning. When we learn from our experience, but not with a stance of a should, that younger self should not have done what they did. That was wrong. No such thing. Thank you. We make choices, and our younger selves know exactly what they needed to do. And we face dilemmas all day long. A dilemma is defined as when different values come into play, and we can only take one choice, do one action in this moment, which means other values may not get to be acted on. So we do the best we can in that moment. And yes, our heart may hurt for the values we couldn't act on. That's different. There's no judgment in that. But then to say, oh, my younger self from yesterday made this choice, and my heart's hurting as I connect to the values my younger self wasn't able to act on right then. And we can feel that and honor that and respect that. It's integrity. It's our value of integrity to look on the choices of our past selves first from a stance of growth and learning. Is there anything I want to learn from that? Then when we beat ourselves up and we buy those judgments. Does this education resonate? Yeah, good. So I tell my veterans, if I hear them say something judgmental about their younger selves, I say, no. I am a fierce protector of your younger self. No. I just say, no, we're not putting that at your younger self's feet. And that alone, sometimes they'll remember that and say that helped them learn that, you're right, that's not truth. There's no truth in judgments. So I want to share a story about my mom, and I want to talk about some of the unique dilemmas that you all and we face. And I'm not sure what's the best use of time at this point. So probably the dilemmas. So a common one I hear about where helplessness shows up, for those of you who are the person with vision loss, is when your sighted helpers in your life offer help that you didn't ask for. If that resonates, say yes. Yeah. So that creates a dilemma right there, because we know the sighted helper cares about us, and maybe they see that we're struggling in some way, and we don't want to hurt their feelings, and yet we also value our own self-sufficiency and independence, and chances are we had a plan for that, of how we were going to do something if we didn't ask for it. So it creates this dilemma of, if I'm assertive to honor my own self-sufficiency and independence and how I want to show up, even if it's a challenge, even if I'm struggling, this is something I want to do myself, and yet this person who cares about me is offering help or advice that I didn't ask for. And I may have an edge to my voice that, again, I don't want to be there, but it happens. It's a dilemma. And so I try to educate. Eric and I have had long conversations about this, and we've named it. This is where externalizing and naming things can be helpful. Inviting in humor, so helpful. So, Eric, I'm going to invite you to tell the story of what we have named when I may say something that I have a plan for, like, I'm thirsty. That one. Well. Yeah, go ahead. Come on up and tell them.
Okay, so say you're sitting on the couch, and your blind partner says, oh, God, I'm so thirsty. Sighted helpers, what do? Go get a glass of water. So the slogan, the shorthand in our relationship is, if you say you're thirsty, I'm going to bring you a glass of water.
Yes.
And I don't care if you didn't really ask for help. You said you were thirsty.
Yeah, because he jumped up, and I was just about to get up myself to get the glass of water, and I tripped over him, and all this happened, and I'm like, and he's like, you said you're thirsty, I was going to get you water, and I'm like, I can get it myself, and all that. So then it became our narrative. This was early on in our marriage, for those moments where he sees maybe I could benefit from help, but I haven't asked for it, and he's offered it, and I get that tone of voice, and we now both say it almost in unison. I know, if you say you're thirsty, I'm going to get you a drink of water. That's our longer narrative name for those moments, and it helps us lighten up and give each other a hug, and we move on. I understand his heart is programmed to be there for me.
I've actually got a new one.
Oh.
This came up yesterday in the session here. I hope you're all here for the panel discussion in the morning, but Jeff pulled up his cane. He whatever you call it, he opened his cane, and his cane made that clacking sound. And he said, you know what that is? That's the sound of independence. That's self-reliance, paraphrasing. And this is how screwed up I am. I started to go, he's opening up his cane. And I stopped. I realized, no, I just made a fool of myself. You had every right to interpret that sound yourself. Nobody asked. She didn't. If she leaned over and said, what's he doing? Then I would have been okay saying it, but she didn't.
So you want to tell them what happened when we were sitting outside?
When? What?
Shoot. Oh my goodness.
Just give me a hint.
I opened up the can.
When
outside.
Yeah, when you.
Because I didn't know what that.
She tried to open it up, and she.
I didn't understand. We were talking about that sound, and I said I actually wasn't quite sure what that sound was, because wasn't the sound my cane makes. And we were talking outside, going over the outline, and he said, I said, that's what the sound was? And so I attempted to open up my cane, and it whacked a couple of things, and it made a different kind of clacking sound, and we just started laughing so hard, and I'm like, mine doesn't make that sound. And he said, yours has 4 sections. I think his had 3. So anyway, it was just, I thought it was funny. As you can see, I get this hysterical laughter sometimes where I can't talk. Anyway, okay, so we have dilemmas. And I encourage you to name them. But some other quick ones, because I know we're going to be running out of time, is the dilemma of when I am asking for help, and Eric's busy with things that he wants. His wants matter to me, and the people who help us in our lives, it's so important to know that just because blindness sometimes runs amok in our lives and creates moments of emotional grief and loss, where I need support, of course we do. Grief and loss, I wish I had more time to just be with you around that, because that's huge and it's valid, and it's telling us that of course we care about our functioning and this new thing we now know we can't do anymore as it progresses. That's so real. But there's times where I'm frustrated because I can't see something and I need his eyes, and he's doing something that he had plotted for his day. And just because I have this blindness in my life doesn't mean my needs in that moment matter more than his. And that's something I try to keep mindful all the time. I can wait, and he can tell me, can it wait? If it's an emergency, I could say, no, it feels really important, do you mind? But he sometimes acts, I think he's internalized this idea because of all the ableisms that somehow, not that you're being discriminatory in any way, it's the opposite, that because I have blindness in my life, that somehow my needs trump his. That's simply not true. And we know our needs for social justice and our needs to stand against the societal barriers. Absolutely, those are important and need all of our support to stand against, of course. But in the day-to-day lives, his needs and wants matter to me just as much as I know his matter to me.
We talk about this a lot, and just this morning, we were in bed, and there was a clattering noise as something fell to the floor. The old me would have jumped out of bed and gone around and looked for whatever it was and found it and given it back to her. I remained stock still, right where I was. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I said, this is taking all of my training.
Yeah.
But I've written down a few of these things. Anne will often put me in what I think is a sighted helper's classic help place is when you're talking to somebody that you should know, and Anne brightly says, "Who's this?" And I don't know the name.
And I hear about it later.
Yeah.
We have a thing. If I don't hi, Anne, if I don't
say, "Oh, Anne, you remember Margaret," yeah.
Then it means he doesn't know, and I forget all the time because I love people, and I'm like, "Oh, who's this?" Anyway.
And then there are a lot of times that I honestly want to help, and I just can't quite live up to Anne's standards because she's a different kind of a personality from what I am.
I'm type A, he's type B.
I'm type Z.
Yeah.
And so when she's picking out a wardrobe and she says, "Do these go together?" I'll say, "Oh, it's good enough, yeah." That is not what she wants to hear.
Can anybody here be my ally there? Is that good?
All right.
Thank you.
If your blind companion asks Siri what time it is, and it takes you less time to look at your watch and see that it's 2:10, do you know enough to keep your mouth shut and just not speak up and beat Siri to the punch?
Yeah.
It's a hard
dilemmas all day long. So all of you, name your patterns. Name them. We have several. If you're thirsty, he was eating pie once, and I was bombarding him with things I wanted to look up online for me, and he's like, "Can I eat my pie?" I'm like, "Yes, of course you can eat your pie." That's the newest one to signal when he just needs me to chill while he's doing something else. Can I eat my pie? So we invite humor in to name these patterns, and it works. It just helps so much. So, is it okay if I end with a story about my mom? Thank you. So, this is a hot summer day when I was 11 years old, and my dad was out in the hayfield with my 3 older siblings. We rotated, and I was home to weed in the garden. My mom was going to finish up in the house and start watering the greenhouses. My little brother, who's 5, as soon as we could walk, we had chores. His job was to haul in some firewood my dad had split and put it into the cellar that's connected to our basement so we could fill it up for the winter. And he could carry, a big log or a couple of little ones. And that was his job. So I'd been weeding for a while, and I came inside to get a drink of water. And when I stepped outside, I could hear this loud water pump, because we had barrels of water in each greenhouse. The hose pump was loud, so I knew Mom was in the upper greenhouse watering. And I heard this whimpering sound off to my left, and I looked over and I saw Joey standing there with a weird expression, and he was so white, and he was just pale, and I saw a spot of blood on his forearm. And so I ran over to him, thinking I would give him comfort. He must have had a scratch, right? So I grabbed his hand to just give some gentle pressure reassurance, and it didn't feel right. And I looked down, and I'll spare you the details, but he had cut his hand open, and it was deep. It was really bad. So I immediately turned to run to the greenhouse to get Mom, and after 2 steps, my legs froze. I couldn't move. And I knew for her to hear me, I was going to have to scream so loudly, and I wasn't even sure if then she could hear me over that motor. So I took in a deep breath. That's all that came out, a whisper. It's like my throat had jammed up. So I tried again. Nothing, no sound that time. So I can't move, I can't scream. I'm looking at the door of the greenhouse with every cell in my body saying, Mom, we need you. And I couldn't move. I've never felt such helplessness in my life at that point. And then I see my mom come running out of the greenhouse. I'd never seen my mom run before. It's not safe on our property. There's farm stuff everywhere, and she's nearly totally blind. But she came running, and my jaw dropped as she ran past me and went straight to Joey. And she picked her baby boy up in her arms, just swooped him up and ran with him into the house. By the time my legs unfroze and I ran in after her, she had already had a chair moved up to the sink, had his hand under the sink, was comforting him. And she says, Clancy, call Grandma. Clancy was her nickname for me. She's the only one who used it. And Grandma was our emergency driver when my dad wasn't home, so I called Grandma. And she came and took Mom and Joey to the emergency room. I finished watering the greenhouse, unplugged the pump, and went back weeding until Dad and the kids came back so I could help unload the hay wagon. And there's no explanation. There's no way she could have heard me. And that was the day where blindness had no effect. Something happened that science cannot explain. And my young childhood self had such secure knowledge that my mom would be there. She would have, I knew she could figure it out. I trusted her. It's an example of such profound, secure attachment and a mother's love. And that's my mom, Grace. And when I think about what I'm trying to share with you all is you are you. I am Anne. I am not RP. It runs amok and it has its effects. I'm Anne. But there's this deeper part of me, my childhood self, that was Gabby, which is where the Clancy came from, Gift of Gab, her Irish in her. That was my nickname, Clancy. I've lost some of that gift of gab, but the core of me is still Clancy. And that's who I wanted to share with you today from my mom, because she has influenced every part of how I am professionally and how I want to be and how I want to show up. So I'm sharing Ann and Clancy with you and my mom, Grace, and I thank you.
Thank you, Anne and Eric. We are all friends, and I really appreciate you bringing that forward to everybody here. Okay, we have the next 20 minutes to open up the floor to you for questions. Because we are recording the session, I ask that you please wait for a microphone to come to you. And we have Julie, Ashley, and Michelle from the foundation here with microphones for you. So please raise your hand and we will come to you. Okay, Michelle?
And thank you so much for that wonderful story about your mom. So touching. And I wondered, did you ever ask her subsequently how she knew to come? Did she just feel it, or?
Yeah, she just felt it.
She just felt the need that something was wrong and she needed to come to where you guys were.
And I don't know how she knew it wasn't me in need, because I have a feeling at that point I was stuck still and pale too. But I think because Joey, that kid was always moving around. I think she must have seen our shapes because she still had a little bit of light dark and somehow knew it was him that was more in dire distress. She just felt it.
She just sensed it. Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
We have a question to your right.
Hi, Anne. My name is Monica. I thank you for sharing your story. A lot of it resonated with me, and I have been in an ACT therapy for many, many years now. And so hearing you say everything you said today was kind of like that, I need the chair in the room to talk to my younger self and show her compassion, whatever. But it's definitely something I do need to hear. So thank you for sharing your story. And I wanted to ask, you explained a lot about how your parents' dynamic was different. Your father was the emotionally avoidant one, and your mother was there for you. And you still had the pain that you went through with your father, and you were able to trust that your mother was there. And in my journey, I am struggling because neither of them were there, and it's really hard for me to learn how to trust and connect and feel secure because no one's ever been there for me, and at least you had your mom, and why would I forgive my small self? You know, I don't know if you know what I'm trying to say, but like, how do you not compare yourself to others in these kind of moments?
Well, I am aware that when I connect to the gratitude and blessing and having my mom, I'm very aware, especially with so many of the veterans I work with and people I've met who had nobody, friend, relative, nobody who showed that they cared enough to share those emotions. So one thing I know is you're an incredible survivor because you found ways to survive and connect in the ways that your environment and people were allowing you to, and something in you knew you were still yearning for healthy, positive attachment and connectedness, and so you sought therapy. We need to destigmatize therapy. I think it's so important. If we can't find natural healing moments, that's where therapy can help with that, to help you at least work through your defenses, to share, and to help yourself feel like you're being authentic with yourself again. So therapy is important. But this community, feeling this is why I was tearful, because I feel like we're with friends. I feel like the person sitting next to you could be somebody you could, if we could form longer term relationships with each other, would be there potentially because of the shared experience, the understanding that often happens. So many millions of people have never had a secure attachment. And it's important to seek it out in therapy with a type of model of therapy that is relationship-based so that healing work has a chance to occur. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if my question really was the question. I think finding the secure attachment and going blind, and if my sense of self and trust are based off, I know you're not going to leave because I can see that you're here. And as I'm losing my vision, how do I know that you haven't completely abandoned me? I already clearly have issues with rejection and abandonment. And I cope with that by seeing people are there and going blind. I can't see people are there. I have usher, so I have hearing loss too. I can't hear people are there. And how do you overcome that part, I guess?
I would validate the emotions and the fear and share them with the people you feel are innately maybe kind, and say, I'm noticing some fear showing up from the past because I haven't had secure attachment, and I'm noticing I'm taking a leap of faith because I feel your kindness, and I want to show up how I want to be in this moment, and I value showing up with loving kindness and fun and humor and all the things you want to connect to for yourself. And share the fear if you feel if you approve of being that authentic, because no matter what the outcome is, if we can show up authentically, our core knows and may feel the relief of, oh, you were speaking your truth there, regardless of how other people respond, because we can't control outcome, and there's the helplessness. But if we stay trapped by the fears and we don't show up authentically and we hold back, is that other person really getting to know the core of you and who you are? This is hard work, recovery and learning to look at the common defenses of how we hide out because we're afraid, because of our past experiences. So they're valid. These defenses are valid. And which ones can we potentially weaken for how we want to show up? And to find kind, decent people who are going to delight in your character, who you are, and want to spend time with you, of course. But if people feel, here's the subtle thing, if somebody experiences us as, I don't trust that you're not going to reject me, innately, somehow they might sense and feel a little bit insulted. You think I'm going to reject you? You know, people then feel judged conversely. They feel like we're putting a judgment at their feet because that's how other people have treated us, for example. So it gets really complicated. Does that make sense? Yeah. The subtle things. Yeah. So showing up authentically and maybe just sharing those core truths and taking risks to be you and to know that no matter what, we don't have to regret sharing our truths.
We have more questions.
Hi, Anne. I'm Joan Creviston from Chicago.
Hi, Joan.
And I want to tell you how wonderful it is to feel your courage, not just in your life, but your courage in sharing your lives together and some of the things that you are facing. And I also want to say that you, I echo your feelings. One of the big reasons why I wanted to come to the conference was because I wanted to connect with people that I have in common with, things in common with, because I've learned as my vision has decreased my need to be in community to divide my fears and my sorrows and get the validation from our family with degenerative diseases. Would you please, if you guys could, share a couple of other examples of how and you need to express help, or how your better half, your other sighted half, helps you, or how you communicate a little bit more. My husband and I are extraordinarily close. I'm extremely feisty and independent. He is a soul of help. That is his love language, is he is a helper. So we're trying to work very hard on finding our own things. One of ours is sympathy or solution. But if you could tell us a few more things that you guys do to communicate, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So we name the patterns, we give feedback, we just know when we're getting prickly with one of these dilemmas showing up.
We often will say something that's, that if an outsider heard us say it, they might think was kind of harsh. Don't you take that tone with me, Missy.
Is that what she says to you?
No, yeah, I love it, yeah. It's our unique humor that we know is a way to challenge to stand against what's showing up together, so we're still together in it, even though it's something that's usually in response to where my tone gets this edge to it, and I don't like when it does that. And so I'll take a moment to center with how do I want to be here, and then I express whatever the frustration was and reassure him.
Yeah,
we do a lot of checking in. You sure you love me as much as when you married me? Yeah.
And that would sound kind of pathetic if you were on the outside. But it is something that we explicitly do. I say, do you really, excuse me, but everything in me is saying that I should jump up and help you right now. Should I really not? And we'll say, no, you should really not. And that's hard sometimes to hear, but one of the really hardest things for me is to just sit there, because I know that if it were me, I would want another person to offer help in that situation, whether I could see or not. It just seems to me that if you're both heading for a door, the polite person reaches out and opens the door first. That's just being courteous. I have sometimes come close to breaking Anne's fingers by doing that.
Because I'm reaching for something, not knowing he's done it, and there you go.
So it's really hard for me to sit there when my soul is telling me that the polite thing to do is to get up and do something, even without being asked, even without saying that I'm doing it. Sometimes I've put something away that she's about to put it away, but I've already put it away, and she's looking for it. Where is it? And I say, I put it away.
So I don't, there isn't any strategy other than we find the ways to name the patterns, and then we have that cue that, so there's some research that showed for couples who have endearments or words that are uniquely theirs, it predicts satisfaction long-term in a relationship. So the little, I wouldn't call you my little cream puff or anything like that, but the endearments or the words, the naming of these patterns that are just ours helps with intimacy. And so the naming, also the externalizing those and talking about them when you're calm, like we know this is something that comes up a lot. What word or words or image even or anything that might indicate that as a cue. And here's what I hope you do. Here's what I hope you know. You are loved. You matter just as much as I do. I know that you want to help because you love me. And in this moment, my value of self-sufficiency and independence is really what I want to show up with. I hope you can respect that. You know.
We already mentioned that Anne is type A and I'm not. And I will want to help. She may even ask for my help. But then when I perform whatever that task is, I will usually do it up to my level of satisfaction. Which creates a whole different kind of problem.
I just want to jump in a second, because I hear from both of you that there is constant and open communication.
Yes.
And even if I step back, you started with communicating to each other what you would call your authentic selves, but your core values. I want to help. I don't always want your help. I want to be independent. And so just listening and hearing about that constant open communication, I just didn't want to stumble past that without pointing that out.
Yeah. It's lovely. She just named it. Open communication. That's the answer. Between people, open, authentic communication of your wants, your hopes, those core wantings matter. I want to feel independent right now. I want to do it myself. You want to help. That's a dilemma. How are we going to navigate it? And the open communication between you and your core self is the internal healing to stand against the judgmental thoughts. And so it's all about open, authentic connectedness and communication with each other.
We have more questions.
Okay.
Another question.
Go for it.
The title of your presentation, Coping with Anxiety and Depression, and you mentioned some really excellent points about validating emotions, externalizing those emotions, those feelings, and dealing with all of these feelings. And I'm familiar with the technique, and I was wondering if you're familiar with emotional freedom technique.
Emotional what?
Emotional freedom technique.
Not those particular terms.
Tapping.
Tapping?
Mm-hmm.
I know EMDR. I'm not trained in that, but I know it uses use of body tapping. So we know right brain work, which is body work. Emotions are a body thing. So the more we can use right brain in our emotional processing, so things like yoga, and there certainly is growing research in different types of body involvement that may help with accessing core emotions, kind of subverting the defenses, but I'm not familiar with that specifically. However, your question helped me realize I didn't talk about the importance of the difference between natural emotions and mental health, what might be considered disorders, where so I encourage anybody, if you think you're having actual symptoms of a mental disorder, that's serious. It's a body, real thing if you're having symptoms, and you should seek professional evaluation and treatment because it's important. You matter, and if the neurotransmitter levels in our brain get out of balance, symptoms can show up, and that's a real thing. And try not to buy any of the stigma from society. It's huge, not just for people with vision loss or serving a sighted helper role. Humanity across the board are struggling with mental health issues, and seeking help is so important. The coping strategies for really strong emotions, it's a fact that when we have really strong emotions, we get basically like tunnel vision. It's kind of the metaphor. Our focus, it gets really hard to connect to our core selves when we have really high, amped up emotions. It's hard to think, it's hard to connect to our emotions, it's hard to rationalize or even form logical memories. That's why so often in the heat of strong emotions, we can't remember exactly what people say. So the important thing in those moments is to give yourself the gift of time. It's okay to say, I need a few moments. Practice that, rehearse it, give yourself time. Nobody gets to claim your time from you. You get to claim it when you need time to center again, so you can, before you make a choice for your actions, you do some sort of centering. So there are many coping strategies. I do have an outline that people could contact Michelle DiVincenzo and ask to send, that has a list of coping strategies. It has the guided mindfulness exercise we did today and a little bit of my outline. But deep breathing, prayer practices, the body movements, just slow moving hand motion or Tai Chi, yoga, aromatherapy, seeking support. Again, who can you call? Just say, I have really strong emotions right now and I don't want to be alone with it. Can you just tell me something that you care about me? Or something. You can coach the people in your life for what you need in those high moments. There are many apps available. The VA has actually produced a few that are free that you could check out. The ACT Coach app, the Mindfulness Coach app, they're free. And they have many wonderful strategies. There's so many apps for calming, centering strategies. So if you don't have somebody there to help you, there's so many of these things you could search out online, the coping strategies to help regulate so you can center and connect to your core.
You might want to check into the tapping solution, because what it does in the tapping, it calms the amygdala.
Excellent.
And that's just so important in being able to think rationally.
Yeah.
is to calm that reptilian brain.
Yes, and that's part of the right brain work. And again, I think there's going to be more and more research coming out about the effectiveness of that. So thank you for sharing.
We have time for maybe two more questions at most.
Okay.
If you'd like. I have one maybe question before we close it up, or while people ask or are thinking of another question. You had started with sort of a practice of a calming mantra. I don't know how else to put that.
Mm-hmm.
And we did talk about some opportunities to manage some of the anxiety and stress. Are there ways that you found to actually notice and acknowledge when that's happening to you? So you had talked about you recognize that there's a tone in your voice. Are there other tips or tricks that people can have that you know of that might help them understand when they might be feeling a way that they're not noticing maybe?
Yeah, so that's kind of core mindfulness strategies of starting a practice every day to kind of check in with yourself throughout the day. Am I fully present? Where's my focus? Is it what I approve of for how I want to be in this moment? Just those simple questions of how am I showing up? Where's my mind taking me? Oh, the mind is pulling me into something that actually isn't how I want to be. Then you know it's the old programming running the show. But throughout the day, just that quick check-in and maybe programming your phone to beep every hour. I have many veterans who do that. Some will put a twist tie around a finger that you'll notice throughout the day. Why did I put this twist tie there? Oh, it's my cue. If I notice that, it's to check in. What am I focusing on? Am I connecting to how I want to be? Do I approve of the pushes and pulls showing up inside me? And so if I'm feeling strong emotions, what strategies have I practiced or found that kind of help me center with who I am? Who do I most want to be? Go ahead. Another question?
Hi, Ann and Eric. My name is Phi. First of all, I wanted to just thank both of you for coming here. I believe you were supposed to present 2 years ago when we were supposed to be in Minneapolis. So I got to watch you virtually, but nothing beats being here in person together. So thank you both for coming again to the conference.
Thank you.
Mine is actually a little bit funny, but I remember just actually watching the two of you interact and laugh, and I definitely caught that on the Zoom last year. And I believe there's a question or maybe a suggestion of, are you going to have like a YouTube channel or a podcast where we can watch you two interact more? So I'm curious if that's happened or if...
Yeah, we did attempt, from feedback from 2 years ago, we attempted a couple of YouTube videos, we named it Finding Lightness and Blindness, because it was meant to be more of the humor magic of us, and we did a couple that you can look at them. I don't really remember a lot of the details at that point.
I don't really recommend them.
Yeah, it was short-lived because then we started fussing with each other about the content and what the next idea, and we both feel confident that someday it'll feel right again to try again. I feel like it will. But those are the ones that did feel right at the time. But again, it's 2 years ago, and maybe we've evolved since then. But feel free to look into that.
I'm really eager to watch Sam's. What has he got? 800 or so YouTubes. I mean.
Yes, they're super funny people. You've got other wonderful people who are funnier to watch. So, but thank you. That's so sweet.
But speaking of things that you find on YouTube. I want to report that Ann did try the toothpaste trick last night.
Oh no.
Does everyone know? Like, do you want to just remind everybody what that was?
Well, one of the secrets you find out from Sam's videos is, how does a blind person put toothpaste on a tube? And the answer is, they don't. They put it in their mouth.
It's a simple trick.
Yeah, you just put the toothpaste in your mouth and then put the toothbrush in.
I'm like, oh, That's so brilliant.
You know,
I'm so going to try that.
The
right?
heavens opened up, and probably there were a lot of rooms last night where people were squirting toothpaste into their mouth.
But Eric happened to be about to get into the shower, and I'm brushing my teeth. I'm going to try it. He's like, oh, I want to see this. And I'm thinking, why would you want to see it?
So she puts it in her mouth and goes,
And I've got toothpaste, I think it was just hanging, and he starts laughing, and so I'm like, yeah, I got to hear my husband's giggle,
and
which I love. He
you
has
got
the
to see a
best
little.
giggle
You got
ever.
to see a little bit today of what happens to Anne when she becomes paralyzed with convulsive laughter.
Yeah,
She's helpless.
I can't move.
Apparently, it went better on the second attempt, which I did not see.
This morning it went much better, but what I tried to do is try to squeeze it alongside of my lower teeth, and it didn't work. I got it just kind of bled over, and it was just kind of a mess. But he saw it. It was really funny. So thank you for the suggestion. We have that memory now. And this morning it just went so much better. I just put it on my tongue, and I could have more control. So anyway, there you go.
You know, I think we're just about out of time, and I want to thank you both for joining us and sharing your stories with everybody, and have everybody join me in thanking you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
You guys did wonderful. It was